When word reached American commanders that the Germans had managed to capture an intact M4 Sherman, it immediately raised alarms. But no one reacted quite like George S. Patton. To Patton, this wasn't just an intelligence inconvenience or a technical loss. It was a ticking clock. He understood something many commanders only realized later. The moment the enemy gets their hands on your equipment, the battlefield quietly changes. The Germans were meticulous engineers and ruthless analysts. Give them time with a Sherman, and they wouldn't just study it. They'd dissect it, measure it, test it, and then figure out exactly how to kill it more efficiently. Patton's first concern wasn't panic. It was momentum. He believed hesitation was more dangerous than enemy fire. Rather than ordering some dramatic recall of tanks or halting operations, he pushed for immediate tactical adjustments at the front. Crews were warned not to assume the enemy was ignorant anymore. If German units now knew the Sherman's armor profile, weak spots, and gun limitations, then predictable behavior would be deadly. Patton emphasized movement, speed, and unpredictability, reinforcing his belief that a Sherman sitting still was a Sherman waiting to be destroyed. He also began pressing commanders to rethink how Shermans were being used in combat. Patton had long argued that American tanks were not meant to duel German Panthers and Tigers head-on. The capture of a Sherman only reinforced that view. If the Germans now fully understood the tank's limitations, then forcing it into one-on-one armor fights played directly into enemy hands. Instead, Patton doubled down on combined arms tactics, using infantry, artillery, air support, and massed maneuver to overwhelm German positions before their superior guns could dominate the fight. There was also an intelligence dimension to his response. Patton assumed, correctly, that the Germans would rush the captured Sherman into testing facilities, where engineers would fire on it, inspect its armor angles, and compare it to their own designs. That meant German anti-tank crews would soon receive updated training based on real-world data, not battlefield guesswork. Patton didn't wait for confirmation of this process. He acted as if it were already happening. In his mind, planning for the worst-case scenario was simply good generalship. At the unit level, this translated into sharper discipline. Tank commanders were urged to avoid exposing the Sherman's most vulnerable aspects, especially its side armor. Patton stressed terrain usage, using hull-down positions when possible, avoiding silhouetting on ridgelines, and coordinating advances so no single tank became an isolated target. These weren't new ideas, but the urgency behind them increased dramatically once the Germans had a Sherman to study in detail. What truly set Patton apart, though, was how he framed the situation psychologically. He refused to let the captured tank become a morale issue. To him, fear spread faster than facts. Instead of treating the incident as a humiliation, he treated it as confirmation of something he already believed: that the enemy was intelligent, adaptive, and dangerous. And that meant American forces had to be better, faster, more aggressive, and more flexible. Patton didn't tell his men to fear German knowledge. He told them to outrun it. He also understood that technology alone never won wars. Even if the Germans learned everything about the Sherman's design, they couldn't replicate what Patton valued most: operational tempo. His doctrine relied on constant pressure, forcing German units to react rather than plan. A captured tank sitting in a test yard didn't matter much if German crews were too exhausted, disorganized, or overwhelmed to fully apply what they'd learned in combat. In the end, Patton's response wasn't about the Sherman itself. It was about time. Every day the Germans spent analyzing that tank was another day Patton intended to exploit on the battlefield. By adjusting tactics immediately and reinforcing his core principles, he made sure the capture of an M4 Sherman didn't become a turning point for the enemy. Instead, it became just another reminder that in Patton's war, speed, aggression, and initiative mattered far more than secrets hidden in steel. Once the immediate tactical adjustments were underway, Patton's thinking moved beyond the front lines and into a much larger arena. He never saw the capture of a Sherman as a one-time battlefield mishap. To him, it was leverage. If the Germans were studying the M4 in controlled conditions, then every weakness they uncovered was a weakness American leadership could no longer afford to ignore. Patton was blunt about this, often uncomfortably so. He used the incident as ammunition in his ongoing arguments with higher command, making it clear that optimism and assumptions would not stop German shells. Patton understood that American tank design had been shaped by industrial realities and strategic priorities, not by dueling the heaviest German armor head-on. The Sherman was reliable, easy to manufacture, and mechanically dependable. But Patton knew that the enemy didn't care about production numbers when a tank was burning in a field. The fact that German engineers were now firing on a captured Sherman and recording the results only sharpened his point. If the enemy could quantify how quickly and from what angles the Sherman could be destroyed, then American forces needed to compensate before those lessons reached the battlefield in force. He pushed hard for improvements, even when he knew change would be slow. Patton wasn't naive about bureaucracy or wartime production limits. But he believed pressure mattered. More armor where possible, better ammunition, improved optics. Anything that reduced the gap between what the Germans knew and what American crews faced in combat. He didn't expect miracles, but he demanded urgency. To Patton, accepting known flaws without challenge was just another way of surrendering initiative. At the same time, he reframed the problem in a way that suited American strengths. If the Sherman wasn't the best tank in a straight fight, then it shouldn't be used as if it were. Patton emphasized numbers, coordination, and momentum. The Germans could study one Sherman in isolation, but they would never face just one. He believed mass and movement could overwhelm technical superiority, especially when backed by artillery and air power. In his view, a Sherman platoon working in concert with infantry and aircraft was far deadlier than any single heavy tank. This mindset influenced how Patton talked about combat itself. He discouraged tank crews from chasing enemy armor for prestige or personal victory. Tank versus tank duels, especially against Panthers and Tigers, were risks taken only when unavoidable. Instead, Patton wanted Shermans breaking through, exploiting gaps, hitting supply lines, and collapsing German positions from the inside out. The captured Sherman reminded him that the enemy was preparing for predictable fights. Patton's answer was to deny them predictability altogether. There was also a subtle psychological edge in how he handled the situation. Patton treated German analysis of the Sherman as proof that American equipment mattered, that it was dangerous enough to warrant serious study. Rather than letting the incident undermine confidence, he flipped it. The Germans wouldn't bother testing a tank that wasn't a threat. This framing helped keep morale intact while still reinforcing the need for smarter tactics and constant adaptation. Patton also believed that knowledge cut both ways. Just as the Germans were learning about the Sherman, American intelligence was learning about German methods. Every report of testing, every battlefield adjustment the enemy made, provided clues about how they intended to fight next. Patton encouraged commanders to watch for these shifts closely. If German anti-tank defenses suddenly changed positioning or engagement ranges, it likely meant the lessons from the captured Sherman were being applied. Recognizing that early could save lives. Ultimately, Patton turned the loss of a single tank into a catalyst. It became a reminder that war was a continuous contest of adaptation, not a static clash of machines. He refused to see equipment flaws as excuses and refused to believe the enemy's technical insight guaranteed them victory. For Patton, the real advantage didn't come from steel or specifications. It came from initiative, pressure, and relentless forward motion. In that sense, the Germans capturing and testing an M4 Sherman didn't weaken Patton's approach. It hardened it. He used the moment to sharpen tactics, challenge complacency, and reinforce a philosophy he lived by throughout the war. Even when the enemy understands your tools, they can still be defeated if you move faster, think harder, and never give them the luxury of fighting on their own terms.